Total Warhammer 3 is an amazing sandbox where you can express your creativity in many different ways. From managing armies to perpetrating war crimes, there's something for everyone.
Life gets a bit worse.
Which kinda got me thinking, can you run a successful Ponzi scheme in Warhammer 3? Spoiler alert, yes you can. In fact, it worked so well, I was able to conquer the entire world, all 569 settlements in less than 50 turns. And so I present to you the max difficulty Ponzi Scheme World Conquest, Vlad von Madoff edition. Why Vlad? Time is money, and extra campaign movement range means we can get more done per turn. Now, if you're not familiar, a Ponzi scheme is an investment that scams people. They take money from one investor and use that money to pay off other investors. These schemes can only work if they're constantly growing and collecting new money to pay off earlier investors. Vlad von Madoff here will need to constantly recruit new investors and collect money from everyone around him, which is why he's skipping taking Eschen, sacked it, and marched straight to Waldenhof to loot and occupy it. That's 3 battles in a single turn, you overachiever. He brought on 2 more investors who will help expand rapidly next turn. He then scammed several kingdoms with a promise to help their ongoing wars, but without any ability or intention to actually do so. By the end of turn 1, he had already established the profit and loss statement of a Ponzi scheme. Negative net income with nothing on the books to balance it out. By turn 2, von Madoff began showing his genius. He attacked his first legendary Lord Dreicha and smashed her, luring her best units into the woods one by one to minimize losses, even milking a tree for every penny it had. Defeating a legendary lord grants a blood kiss, which can be used to unlock stronger investors and free bonuses. When you're always running at redline, free is the best thing you can get. He took Essen, then Eschen, and finally attacked Castle Tempelhof with Isabella. Now you might be wondering why split the 2 lovers up. Vlad has only one true lover, and it's cold hard cash. Isabella has the siege attacker trait, allowing her to attack walled settlements immediately, which increases cash flow, hence the separation. While the odds looked bad, never underestimate how cunning a scammer can be. She gathered her employees into a massive blob, looking more like a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting than a zombie horde, marched them through the enemy gates, and waited. The Necromancer has a passive heal that will keep most units alive. The massive blob spreads the damage out between different units, and casting a heal will resurrect any actually dead units back to, life? Unlife? Undead, I guess? And with the majority of the enemy tied up, our blacked out school bus can ram the enemy into submission, turning this decisive defeat into an embarrassingly easy heroic win. Keeping losses to a minimum was extremely important for 2 reasons. It reduces employee rehiring costs, and more importantly, it meant we could expand rapidly without waiting to heal back up. 3 blood kisses were used to unlock a CFO from the Lamian line and give a 20% XP boost to all characters. Before ending the turn, 3 new lords were hired, which brought net income to a negative 1200 per turn. Now, we've got over 450 hours of recordings to get through, so let's speed it up a bit. Von Madoff's first goal was to achieve short victory to unlock a 15% replenishment bonus. He needed 30 settlements in total and a couple specific ones from the Empire. Turn 3 saw 4 new settlements join the company, and 8 full-time managers were leading employees around the map, more than doubling the monthly deficit from last month. Turn 4 saw some cost-cutting measures, with Vlad leaving his department behind, taking only an executive assistant with him to knock out the first quest battle. He baited enemy artillery fire, grouped up enemy infantry together for easy vortex nukes, and smashed the army using a cost-effective army of 2. While the item reward was decent enough on its own, it was the cash prize of 5 grand he was really after. That's 2 or 3 more full-time managers he could hire. Things were moving quickly now. 3 blood kisses were spent to unlock more von Madoffs and a 10% replenishment bonus. The C-suite was coming together. Turn 5 saw another cost-cutting measure at Flensburg. The Changeling was nearby and at war with Stirland, so we let these 2 idiots smash into each other. Flensburg fell, an Empire army was dead, and the Changeling's army was cut in half, all for free. On turn 6, we finished off what was left of the Changeling with minimal losses. Vlad also handled the second quest battle, but brought along some flying assistance to help since this army was much stronger. Enemy blobs were nuked several times. Crypt horrors were ambushed by themselves and wiped out, but they kept spawning Graveguard unit after Graveguard unit, causing Vlad to hit his healing cap. We just managed to finish off the Strigoi with 4 minutes left on the clock for another item reward and 5 grand in cash. Invasion plans for the north were set in motion, and Kislev would soon be overran. The first Necrarch was unlocked this turn as well, giving a plus 25 bonus to research. By the end of turn 6, we had amassed 18 settlements, hired 13 full-time lords, and ran a deficit of over 4,000 per turn. By turn 7, it was time to expand in all directions. 2 armies were commissioned in the south to attack the dwarves soon. War was declared on Reichland, Wiesenland and Nuln, the Fecundites, and Kislev. The PONZI was in full swing now. Settlement after settlement fell. Heroic victories were achieved, and even the school bus was getting 1,000 kills per battle. By turn 8, Kislev was no more and their assets were transferred over. Most armies were filled with cheap employees, leaving the managers to do most of the work. And with over 1,300 kills in a single battle, I'd say they deserved a raise, were it not for the minus 6,000 being paid out each month already. Another 2-man, cost-cutting stack was formed and helped to wipe out Festus from the map. Nuke after nuke, Spirit Leech, and more were cast, while the zombie fodder bros held the front line. By the end, Festus was wiped off the map. The second level of the Necrarch bloodline was unlocked shortly after, granting another Necrarch lord and plus 15 winds of magic to all armies. And the Festus battle just showed how reliant on spells our armies can really be. We declared war on the dwarves at last, launched several surprise assaults, and took 2 settlements from them. Now for the first of many big disappointments in the campaign. Von Madoff was on track for short victory by turn 8, but mismanaged siege attacker placement. We had over 30 settlements by the end of the turn, but was still missing Altdorf, a walled settlement. The Necrolord had to make siege equipment before assaulting, which would take a full turn to make. There was still a chance though. On the end of the turn, the enemy sallied out to attack because our army was so weak. If we could manage to kill the garrison and army down to the last man, we could take control of the settlement on turn 8. The main blob was moved to the thick woods, which would shield them from ranged weapons and reduce combat effectiveness of their cavalry. The Mounted Lord, Black School Bus, and Direwolves were sent out to break up the enemy formation and pick off isolated units. Empire Cav are no joke, but they couldn't handle a 4v1 and were driven off. The Lord was sent in to harass artillery, since even a single well-placed shot on our blob would be devastating. Next, she picked off enemy lords, making it easier for the enemy to rout once they reached our lines. Finally, it was time. The blob was exposed, causing the enemies to rush forward and engage. The enemy was so focused on reaching the blob, they forgot to protect their range units and were picked off one by one. Without any AoE damage in their army, their melee troops didn't stand a chance against the blob, and were eventually grinded down. Everyone did their best to chase every last unit on the field, but too many units escaped with their lives, and short victory would have to wait one more turn. On turn 9, what was left in Altdorf was massacred, and short victory was achieved. Next, the push for long victory. We needed 60 settlements in total, several specific provinces, and we had to eliminate Reichland. While Greenskins weren't part of the long victory, they were part of the world conquest. So we declared war on the Bone Rattlers and began pushing them out of the mountains in the east. Throughout the Unclean was evicted from the north, and Zufbar's strongest army smashed in the south in an ultra-rare auto-resolve win. I say ultra-rare because by the end, nearly 1,100 battles would be fought in this run, and 845 of them would have to be fought manually. By the end of turn 9, income had cratered to minus 9,000 per turn, with 13 armies in the field and 37 settlements owned. Turn 10 saw several big threats eliminated. Zufbar was gone, Wiesenland and Nuln was destroyed, Karl Franz ran like a coward only to get smashed moments later, and settlements were taken on all fronts. Von Madoff wasn't known for his diplomatic exploits, but from time to time he would dabble. On turn 11, he opened dialogue with Heinrich Kemmler with the ultimate goal of confederating his lands into the fold. He even convinced a Cathay faction and an Empire faction to become his vassal. Why exactly? I don't know, since he couldn't offer any sort of protection given they were halfway across the world. Turn 11 saw another big jump in deficit spending up to 14,000, with 16 armies in the field and 48 settlements under control. We were able to maintain status quo over the next few turns, rapidly expanding and winning unremarkable battle after unremarkable battle. But that's the true sign of a successful business. Boring, consistent execution on a daily basis. Reichland was destroyed on turn 12, putting us one step closer to long victory. The final Necroc bloodline was unlocked on turn 13, costing 12 blood kisses, but granting a massive 10% upkeep reduction for every single employee. And since we overhired, this would really reduce our overhead. On turn 14, to the shock of absolutely nobody, we lost our Empire vassal, but also finished a 10% movement speed research, which will come in handy. We finally wiped out Karak Kadrin in the mountains to the east and declared war on Everland, who hold lands we need for long victory. For some stupid reason, we had a non-aggression pact at the start of the campaign with them, and by turn 14 we're still not able to declare war on them without a reliability penalty, but we'll write it off as a cost of doing business at this pace. By turn 15 we took Grenstad, eliminating Everland and achieving long victory, and triggered the end time countdown. Normally, end times come late into a campaign when you've got elite armies to handle them, but we were expanding so quickly, it would come before we even left the early game phase. By the end of turn 15, we had grown to 83 settlements and held income steady at minus 9,000 per turn with 16 armies in the field. But with the end times looming in the near distance, we had to keep pushing hard to avoid any slowdowns by the time it arrived. On turn 16, our little Cathay vassal was destroyed, as well as another Confederation target. Our first siege attackers were finally coming online, a Vargolf and a zombie Dragonlord, meaning we could take on walled settlements much faster. A couple trade agreements with the big Cathay factions were signed to help slow the bleeding some, but nothing could have prepared me for some of the toughest fights of this long campaign. And from the French of all people, a note to the editor. At first, the garrison and army inside Couronne sallied out to attack. Both lords had AoE spells that could wreck the blob, as well as a couple trebuchet. Fortunately, the Necrolord had a flying mount and was able to harass the First Lord down quickly. The zombie summons were used on the reinforcing army to group them up, and a couple well-placed Winds of Death spells massacred most of their army. However, the pesky French cavalry are no joke and nearly killed the Necro, but more summons were used to get enough space to fly away to safety. The rest was left for the blob to handle, which they did easily, losing only 52 units. But the worst of the French was still to come. Louen himself showed up with a stronger army, better gear, and was virtually unkillable by our army. Worst yet, they had several units that could decimate our blob with only a single cast. The plan was to hide the blob in the woods at the edge, use the Necro to somehow harass their heroes while avoiding several units that could easily solo him. He dove to attack their caster and began chipping away at her. The AI was still waiting for reinforcements to come, which stopped them from swarming our lord, but time was running out quickly. She was only half dead by the time they showed up. Louen charged him from the sky and he had to run, but if we left the hero alive, she would nuke the blob. He was faster, but had trouble landing any attacks. It looked more like how dogs sniff each other's rear end than a dangerous chase. We circled back to the hero again to try to dive bomb her, landed a hit, and summoned zombies to try to buy more time. And this is exactly why we can't let this lady anywhere near the blob. The process was repeated a few more times, just trying to get whatever chip damage we could on her. She literally ran to 3 different corners of the map trying to evade us, luckily missing the last corner where our blob was. She was nearly dead, but diving in was too dangerous now, and I decided to nuke her with magic missile spells. At the same time the missiles hit, she failed an overcast lightning bolt and zapped herself from existence. The first major threat was finally down. Louen was still hot on the Necro's tail, so he brought him back to the blob, and the main fight was now on. The enemy units were vastly superior to our mostly zombie blob, but we did have good healing and the trees to block projectiles and debuff their cav. I'm not sure if you've seen what 30 plus minutes of sustained, constant melee combat before looks like, but it was terrifying. We'd used all of our winds of magic to heal, and units were now starting to die off, but Louen was still at full HP. The skeletons were starting to crumble, but so was the enemy morale. Louen's morale finally tanked, and their army lost the will to fight. It had cost us half of our army, but the line held, and we finished the siege next turn. With less than 10 turns left before the end times, we expanded in every direction possible, crossing oceans, mountains, and everything in between. The battles were mostly trivial, but the real challenge lay in how many armies and where to place each of them. By the end of turn 24, we had gobbled up the whole of the empire, the surrounding mountains, and even pushed as far west as Ulthuan and the lands just north of it. But now the real test began. The will of Hashut had fired, and the Chaos Dwarves began spewing out from Zarnagrund. They tunneled all over the map, but luckily only the Empire region was under threat for now. The end-time armies are always a serious threat, but the Chaos Dwarfs are doubly so. An emergency army was recruited at Gorsel with hopes of fending them off, but it's a tall task for a level 1 lord with mostly fodder units. On the end turn, they attacked, and our first major loss of the campaign was likely upon us. The army was separated into several groups: fast-moving high-value cavalry, a squadron of bats with armor-piercing banners equipped, and a huge mass of expendable units. The first goal was to wipe out the high-level Flying Lord. We baited him into rushing the only good units we had, then ambushed him in the air with every flying unit that we had. At the cost of half of our air force, the enemy lord was dead on the battlefield. On the other end of the map, we baited the enemy space cow into attacking our lord, then swarmed it with invisible infantry units and chased it off the battlefield with the remaining bats. The goal was now to use the fodder units to spread their high-tier infantry out so we could isolate them one by one and kill them quickly. The problem is they are so damn strong. Even a 4 versus 1 is mostly a losing proposition against these guys. So I did what any good scammer would do. I split my army into 2 groups, forced him to chase me around the map, and whittled them down one by one with my lord and his barrier. They would eventually catch up with all the zombies, skeletons, and graveguard units we had, so I let them have a brave final last stand instead. They did manage to kill a single unit, but eventually got ran down. We caught an infernal guard by themselves and cycle charged it to death, but at a very high cost. I eventually fell back to cycle charging with the lord until they broke, 140 minutes later. Needless to say, my right hand was now showing signs of arthritis.
Swiftly!
Along with expanding on all fronts, we dealt with more end times attacks from the overlords of Zarduk. The battle followed a similar pattern. Fight like men, lose 90% of your army, then fight like Mongols with whatever you have left to eke out a win after hours. By turn 27, we had halted the end times army in the northwest and killed off their tunnel army, rehired the Empire Lamian Lord to defend against a second tunnel army, and even took the fight to them at the Fall of Dooms. On the plus side, we had a flying vampire lord to harass with, but on the downside, we had literally no spells or strong units to fight with. The battle could only be described as a Sisyphean struggle of epic proportions, baiting enemies into shooting their own units, attacking isolated units one by one, and spending more than half of my time waiting for the barrier to recharge. I'm going to pause here for a sec. How long do you actually think this fight took? If you said 7.5 hours, you're actually wrong, because I got stuck in the fucking map and couldn't move and had to redo the whole fight from the start again after Alt F4ing. The second time around, they got army lost, but still had a Cathay destroyer, which is unbreakable and was mauling the only unit we had that could possibly fight it. So we played capture the flag with zombies and the cavalry. By the time only a single capture point was left, we used the Lord to distract him long enough to finish the capping and won the battle by default. Over 18 hours had elapsed since the first fight started, but we finally came out on top, took a settlement from the end times, and wiped out an elite army from the map. 100% worth it in my books. We continued taking land from all over the map and wiping out end time armies left, right, and center. We still needed to take Zarnagrund to finish off the end times crisis and achieve ultimate campaign victory. By turn 29, we were in position to lay siege, but without a siege attacker, it would be delayed another turn. Fortunately, their ally had set a caravan right outside the settlement, pulling in the garrison and nearby armies. The battle itself was unremarkable, but the XP gain was massive, over 10,000, which was enough to push the Vampire Lord up 3 levels and gain his Dragon Zombie mount, and more importantly, Siege Attacker. Zarnagrund easily fell, the overlords of Zarduk were eliminated, and the ultimate campaign victory was achieved. But we still had one more goal to accomplish before working on the world conquest. Domination campaign victory requires 272 settlements, and we were sitting at 230 by the end of 29. But with 32 armies on the field, every direction was pushed to the limit, and only 3 turns later we had taken enough to get the final victory, Domination. This was the game's way of saying, okay, you win, good game, you can stop now. In looking at the stats, von Madoff had been winding down too, sitting at a paltry negative 3,000 per turn. But like all good true crime stories, the antagonist never learns to walk away in time. He hired 2 more armies by the end of turn 32 and began pushing even harder. Turn 33 went up to 38 armies and negative 16,000 per turn. He was back in business. Now the conquest took on a whole different set of challenges. The battles were trivial, but the logistics and pathing were the real bottleneck. Louen was mostly conquered, and plans were set to sail several armies south to get to the bottom of the map, since sailing there would take 10 turns alone, not leaving much time left to conquer everything. Efforts to confederate Kemmler also stepped up. He was paid 15,000 for military access and given gifts to improve relations. Yes. But it would take a lot more to convince him. By turn 34, we paid him another 41,000 to get a defensive alliance, but he was still negative 61 to confederate, and we needed a different plan. Next turn, we started paying him to join wars against tough enemies. 1,300, then another 17,000, and another gift on top. He was down to negative 33 for confederation. With wages already at minus 22k, it was unlikely that we could hire enough troops to convince Kemmler to confederate, so forcing him into wars was the next best option. By turn 37, we had him join another war for 23,000. Forced him to give back 2,000 of it for a military alliance. And finally, by turn 38, I had reached my limit. He was pulled into 2 more wars, for free thanks to the military alliance, but we still wouldn't budge, so we threatened to attack him with the full might of 44 armies if he didn't accept. I guess if you're going to commit fraud via Ponzi scheme, you might as well go all the way and extort people while you're at it. And luckily, Kemmler came to his senses, took the hint, and accepted the Confederation. Backing up a bit here. On turn 35, several armies were hired near the tunnels from the End Times Crisis. Now, it seemed like this was going to be a huge speed bump for a 50-turn world conquest, but it ended up being the saving grace. These armies would comprise of elite troops from massive corpse piles and sent through the tunnels to parts of the map that we haven't expanded to yet, Lustria and Cathay. By turn 37, we sent several armies through the tunnels and began expanding on the new fronts by turn 38. Tlaxcalan and Lustria, then Mingzhu and Pomei fell in Cathay, which provided several new provinces to spam more armies and flood both areas. At the peak of the conquest, we were taking 25 settlements per turn, but as the map turned red, that number would dwindle and the race for 569 would begin. By turn 44, we had taken every province in the northwest and began disbanding those armies, only to rehire them on different fronts. With only 6 turns left, we had to clear more than half of Cathay and Lustria, and literally the entire southern coastline. Fortunately, this was accounted for several turns before, and nearly a dozen armies were shipped across the water to conquer the southern island in quick succession. Within 2 turns, only a single settlement remained in the south, and 2 settlements in Lustria. But Cathay would prove to be the real challenge. 8 settlements to take, and only 2 turns left to do it, including a massive distance to the final port at Hidden Landing. On turn 49, we conquered the rest of Lustria, and the southern coast, and everything else on the map except the southern tip of Cathay. Daicheng fell, then Shiwu, southern outpost, and even Mountain Pass. Everything was conquered except one, Hidden Landing. It came down to 2 armies from the water. The first one couldn't reach the land even with forced march on, but the second army had a chance. And that's when this happened. Oh man, it's gonna let us land. Holy shit, we got it. You have no idea how stressed I was about this. I'm gonna auto-resolve it. That's the world. We got it. Tormentors are gone. Faction destroyed. Hidden Landing was taken and the world fell into an eerie silence. 569 settlements taken in only 49 turns on the hardest difficulty settings. Von Madoff had used a Ponzi scheme to collect money from his neighbors, ran a deficit for literally the entire campaign, even as deep as 90,000 in the red, and still managed to come out on top. With over 850 battles fought in person, some of them taking actual IRL days long to fight. I think it's safe to say there will never be another Vlad von Madoff again.